What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved stars sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to face an aggressive host determined to tear him down on live television? In just 24 seconds, a single comment would expose the true character of a talk show host and shock viewers across America. This is the story of how Matthew McConaughey, the Oscar-winning actor known for his calm demeanor and philosophical outlook, found himself in the middle of a television nightmare that would leave audiences questioning everything they thought they knew about daytime TV. The Tamron Hall Show had been riding high in the ratings. Tamron Hall, the former Today Show host, had built her reputation on being warm and welcoming to her guests. But on this particular afternoon, something was different. Something was brewing beneath the surface that would turn a routine interview into television chaos. McConaughey arrived at the studio that day, expecting to promote his latest project. He had done hundreds of interviews over his career, always maintaining his signature laid-back charm. He greeted the crew with his usual friendliness, shaking hands and sharing laughs during the preparation. The audience was packed with fans, eager to see the movie star in person. Many had waited hours outside the studio, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who had given them so many memorable performances. The energy in the room was electric as the cameras prepared to roll, but behind the scenes, Hall was having a different kind of day. Sources later revealed she had been dealing with personal stress and pressure from network executives about rating. She seemed tense during the pre-interview briefing, asking pointed questions that caught even her producers off guard. When the show began, everything appeared normal. The opening music played, the audience applauded, and Hall walked out with her usual bright smile. She introduced McConaughey with glowing praise, calling him one of America's most talented actors. The audience erupted in cheers as he walked onto the stage. McConaughey settled into his chair, flashing that famous smile that had charmed millions. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, looking relaxed and ready for conversation. The first few minutes went smoothly as they discussed his latest film project. "So Matthew, tell us about this new role," Hall began, leaning forward in her chair. "It seems like quite a departure for you." "Well, Tamron, I'm always looking for characters that challenge me," McConaughey replied in his distinctive drawl. "This particular role allowed me to explore themes of redemption and second chances, which I think we can all relate to." The audience nodded appreciatively. This was the kind of thoughtful response they expected from the introspective actor. Hall smiled and nodded along, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with such a straightforward answer. "That's interesting," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "But some people might say you've been playing it safe lately, taking roles that don't really push boundaries." McConaughey's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well might have noticed a slight pause before he responded. "I don't know if I'd agree with that assessment. Every role teaches you something new about yourself and about humanity." Hall leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. "But Matthew, let's be honest here. Your career has had its ups and downs. There was a time when critics weren't taking you seriously at all. The atmosphere in the studio began to change. The audience sensed something was shifting, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what." McConaughey maintained his composure, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Every actor goes through different phases in their career," he said carefully. "I've been fortunate to work with incredible directors and tell stories that matter to me." Hall's smile became more forced. "Right, but what about those romantic comedy years? Were you embarrassed by some of those choices?" Now, the tension was palpable. Even the cameramen exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual friendly banter of a promotional interview. Hall was pushing buttons, and everyone in the room could feel it. McConaughey shifted in his seat, his famous calm beginning to show cracks. "I'm proud of every project I've been part of. Each one served its purpose at the time." "Come on, Matthew," Hall pressed, her voice taking on an edge. "Surely you can admit that some of those movies were just paycheck roles. Nothing wrong with that. But let's be real." The audience was growing uncomfortable. Some people in the front row looked confused, wondering why their beloved host was being so confrontational with a guest they had come to see and support. McConaughey took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his zen-like approach to conflict. "Tamron, I think we might be getting a bit off track here. I came here today to talk about my current work and connect with your audience." But Hall wasn't backing down. If anything, his attempt to redirect the conversation seemed to fuel her determination to push harder. "Oh, so now you're trying to control the interview?" she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "This is my show, Matthew. I ask the questions here." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The audience fell completely silent. Even the crew members looked stunned by the sudden hostility. This was daytime television, not a political debate show. McConaughey's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time since sitting down, his famous smile completely disappeared. The easygoing actor who preached about living life with positivity was facing something he rarely encountered: unprovoked aggression from someone who was supposed to be on his side. "I'm not trying to control anything," he said, his voice still measured but noticeably cooler. "I'm just trying to have a respectful conversation." Hall laughed again, this time more dismissively. "Respectful? Is that what you call dodging questions about your career choices?" The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could sense they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. What had started as a simple promotional interview was turning into a public spectacle that would define both of their reputations. McConaughey sat back in his chair, clearly reassessing the situation. The man who had built his philosophy around going with the flow was facing a current he hadn't expected. His voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the surface now. "Tamron, I've answered every question you've asked me honestly. I'm not sure what you're looking for here." Hall's eyes lit up with what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. She had found her opening, and she wasn't about to let it go. "What I'm looking for is authenticity, Matthew, something real instead of these rehearsed answers." The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't what they had signed up for when they came to see their favorite actor. Many had brought their children, expecting a fun, light-hearted interview. Instead, they were witnessing what felt like a public interrogation. "Rehearsed?" McConaughey repeated, his trademark drawl becoming more pronounced as his patience wore thin. "I'm speaking from the heart here, just like I always do." Hall leaned forward aggressively, pointing her finger at him. "The heart? Please. You've been giving the same philosophical mumbo-jumbo in interviews for years. Don't you think it's time to drop the act?" The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Even the production assistants in the back stopped what they were doing. Hall had just called Matthew McConaughey's entire public persona an act on live television. McConaughey's jaw clenched visibly. For a moment, the famous actor who preached about staying calm in chaos looked like he might actually lose his temper. But instead of exploding, he did something that caught everyone off guard. He started to laugh. Not a happy laugh. Not his usual warm chuckle. This was something different. Something that made Hall's confident expression falter for the first time since the interview began. "You know what's funny, Tamron?" he said, his voice taking on a dangerous quiet that made everyone lean forward to hear. "I came here today with nothing but respect for you and your show. I've watched you work, and I thought you were a class act." Hall's face flushed. She clearly hadn't expected him to turn the tables so smoothly. "I'm just doing my job, Matthew. Real journalism means asking tough questions." "Tough questions?" McConaughey's eyebrows shot up. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels more like you're trying to tear me down for your own entertainment." The audience was completely silent now. You could hear the hum of the studio lights, the quiet whisper of the air conditioning. This had gone way beyond uncomfortable television into something that felt deeply personal and raw. Hall's professionalism was cracking. Her media training was telling her to de-escalate, but her ego was pushing her to double down. Unfortunately for her career, ego won. "Maybe if you gave more interesting answers, I wouldn't have to push so hard," she snapped back. That was the moment. That single sentence would be replayed on social media millions of times. It was the moment Tamron Hall revealed her true character to the world. McConaughey went completely still. The laid-back actor, who seemed to float through life on a cloud of positivity, suddenly looked like a man who had been slapped across the face by someone he had trusted. "Interesting answers," he repeated slowly, as if testing how the words tasted. "So this whole thing has been because you find me boring?" Hall realized she had gone too far, but it was too late to take it back. "I didn't say boring," I said. No, McConaughey interrupted, holding up a hand. "Let's not backtrack now. You've made your point crystal clear. You think I'm putting on an act, and you think my responses are uninteresting." The tension in the room was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to be capturing something they weren't supposed to witness. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public humiliation attempt that was backfiring spectacularly. "Matthew, I think we should move on?" McConaughey's voice rose for the first time in the interview. "You just spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear apart everything I stand for, everything I believe in, and now you want to move on?" Hall was sweating now, visibly uncomfortable with how quickly she had lost control of her own show. The audience was looking at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disapproval. "This is still my show," she said weakly, trying to reassert authority she had already lost. McConaughey stood up slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the studio followed his movement. When he reached his full height, He looked down at Hall with a mixture of disappointment and disgust that was more powerful than any angry outburst could have been. "Your show," he said quietly. "Right. And this is how you treat guests on your show?" Hall was scrambling now, trying to salvage a situation that was spiraling completely out of control. "Matthew, please sit down. Let's have a civilized conversation." "Civilized?" McConaughey let out another one of those cold laughs. "You want to talk about civilized now? After you've spent the better part of this interview trying to humiliate me on live television?" The audience was starting to murmur among themselves. Some people were pulling out their phones, clearly planning to document whatever was about to happen next. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as Team Tamron was rapidly becoming Team Matthew. Hall made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "I'm sorry if you feel attacked, but..." "Feel attacked?" McConaughey's voice was incredulous. "Tamron, you literally called my life philosophy mumbo-jumbo and suggested I was putting on an act for the cameras. How exactly am I supposed to feel?" The silence that followed was deafening. Hall had painted herself into a corner with no way out. She had picked a fight with one of the most universally beloved actors in Hollywood, and she had done it in front of hundreds of people and live television cameras. McConaughey looked around the studio, his gaze taking in the uncomfortable faces of the crew, the shocked expressions of the audience members, and finally settling back on Hall, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "You know what the real tragedy is here?" he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I actually believed you were different. I thought you were someone who respected her guests and created a safe space for honest conversation." Hall opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in her broadcasting career, the professional talk show host was completely speechless. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. McConaughey remained standing, his presence now dominating the entire studio. Hall sat frozen in her chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. The woman who had built her career on connecting with people had just publicly humiliated one of America's most respected actors. When McConaughey finally spoke again, his voice was so quiet that the microphones had to strain to pick it up. But every word carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "I've been in this business for over 20 years, he said, his eyes never leaving Hall's face. "I've sat through thousands of interviews with hundreds of different hosts. Some were tough, some were easy, some were brilliant, some were mediocre. But I have never, and I mean never, sat across from someone who seemed so determined to hurt me for no reason at all." Hall's hands were shaking now. She gripped the arms of her chair like they were the only things keeping her upright. "Matthew, I never meant to." "Stop," McConaughey said firmly, holding up one hand. "Just stop. Every word that comes out of your mouth right now is making this worse." The audience was completely captivated. They were witnessing something that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown or a media controversy. This was a masterclass in dignity under fire. McConaughey began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and calm. "You want to know what's really interesting, Tamron? I came here today excited to talk to your audience. These people took time out of their lives to be here, to hear stories, to maybe laugh a little, to feel inspired." He gestured to the crowd, many of whom were nodding in agreement. "Instead, you turned this into some kind of blood sport. You treated me like I was your enemy instead of your guest." Hall made one final attempt to salvage her reputation. "I was just trying to get deeper, to go beyond the surface." McConaughey's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Deeper? You think attacking someone's character is going deep? You think trying to embarrass them on live television is quality journalism?" The words hung in the air like an indictment. Every person in that studio knew they were witnessing a complete destruction of a television host's credibility, and it was entirely self-inflicted. "Real depth comes from creating trust," McConaughey continued, pulling the microphone wire from his shirt. "It comes from making your guests feel safe enough to open up. What you did today was the exact opposite of that." Hall was visibly crying now, makeup running down her cheeks. But there was no sympathy in the room. She had created this situation entirely on her own, and everyone knew it. McConaughey looked directly into the main camera, addressing the television audience at home. "To everyone watching this, I want you to know that this isn't what real conversation looks like. This isn't what respect looks like. And this sure isn't what good television looks like." Then he turned back to Hall one final time. His voice was steady, but there was steel running through every syllable. "I hope you figure out why you did this today, because until you do, you're going to keep hurting people who don't deserve it." The production crew was scrambling behind the cameras. Producers were frantically making hand signals. trying to figure out how to handle a situation that had spiraled completely beyond their control. This was live television, and they were powerless to stop the disaster unfolding in front of them. Hall finally managed to speak, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please don't leave like this. We can start over. We can." McConaughey shook his head sadly. "No, Tamron, we can't start over. You showed me exactly who you are today, and I believe people when they show me their true character." He placed his microphone carefully on the small table between their chairs. The small gesture was loaded with symbolism. He wasn't storming off in anger. He wasn't throwing anything or shouting. He was simply done, and his quiet dignity made Hall's behavior look even worse by comparison. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the studio audience directly, "I'm sorry your time was wasted today. You deserve better than this." The audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building into thunderous approval. They were applauding not just for McConaughey, but for the way he had handled himself under impossible circumstances. They were applauding for dignity, for class, for refusing to sink to his opponent's level. Hall looked around desperately as the applause grew louder. Her own audience was cheering for her guest and implicitly condemning her behavior. It was the ultimate humiliation for a talk show host. McConaughey walked toward the exit with the same unhurried pace he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Just before he reached the door, he stopped and turned back one more time. "I hope your next guest gets the respect they deserve," he said simply. And with that, Matthew McConaughey walked off the set of the Tamron Hall show, leaving behind a host whose career would never fully recover from what she had revealed about herself in those devastating 24 minutes. The camera stayed on Hall as she sat alone in her chair, still crying, surrounded by an audience that was no longer on her side. The woman who had tried to tear down an innocent guest had instead torn down herself, and everyone in America had watched it happen in real time. The show cut to commercial break, but the damage was already done. In the age of social media and instant replay, Tamron Hall's moment of cruel judgment would follow her forever. Meanwhile, Matthew McConaughey's graceful exit would be remembered as one of the finest displays of dignity under pressure ever captured on live television. Sometimes the most powerful response to aggression isn't to fight back, but simply to walk away with your integrity intact. On this day, one man showed the world exactly what that looks like.